They brought her at dusk, a cruel joke delivered on horseback. The laughter of the men, rough and sharp as broken glass, echoed in the twilight as they deposited her on the porch of Jonah's isolated homestead. He watched from the window, his face a mask of stone carved by grief and solitude. They called her a gift, a piece of unclaimed property from the railroad camp, a china doll to warm his cold bed. But Jonah saw the truth in their sneering eyes. She was a taunt, a living reminder of the emptiness they believed he deserved. When their hoofbeats faded into the vast, indifferent silence of the plains, he opened the door. She stood there, small and trembling, her dark clothes thin against the biting wind. Her face, pale in the fading light, was a canvas of exhaustion and fear, yet her eyes held a flicker of something unbreakable. He was a man of few words, and grief had stolen most of them. He intended to tell her to leave, to walk back to the wretched settlement that had spat her out, but the words caught in his throat. Her own voice was a mere whisper, her English fractured but clear. "Please." Just for the night, it wasn't a question so much as a prayer, offered to a God she wasn't sure was listening. He saw not the joke the men had intended, but a splinter of profound human desperation that mirrored the hollowed-out cavern in his own chest. Without a word, he jerked his head toward the barn, the cold air scraping his lungs. It was not kindness, but a simple, transactional delay of the inevitable. She bowed her head in gratitude, a gesture so deeply foreign and yet so universally understood, and disappeared into the shadows of the rough-hewn building. Jonah bolted his door, the sound echoing the finality with which he had locked away his own heart. He awoke to a silence that felt different. Not the hollow, ringing silence of loss, but a settled quiet. The cold morning light crept through the grimy windows of his kitchen, a room that had become a monument to his neglect. For a year, since his wife had been taken by the fever, the house had been slowly dying around him. Dust lay thick as snow on every surface, dishes were piled high, and the air was stale with the scent of a life untended. Yet, this morning, something had shifted. On the rough-hewn table, a clean space had been cleared. A bowl of something warm, a simple porridge made from his dwindling stores, steamed gently, a silent offering. His tin cup, scrubbed clean, sat beside it. He looked around. The floor had been swept, the jumble of pots and pans arranged with an uncanny order. On a hook by the door, his heavy work coat hung, and he saw that a long, jagged tear in the sleeve had been meticulously stitched with near-invisible thread. He had not heard her enter. She had moved like a ghost, a whisper of order in his chaos. He found her by the woodpile, her small frame methodically stacking logs with a precision that belied her apparent fragility. She did not look at him, but he felt her awareness of his presence. This was not a plea for sanctuary, it was a payment, an offering of competence in exchange for shelter. He was a man who understood work, the language of calloused hands and aching backs. He understood this silent transaction far better than he did the brittle artifice of conversation. The food on the table was a statement, "I am not a burden." The mended coat was a promise, "I can make things whole again." He ate the porridge, the warmth spreading through him, a foreign and unsettling sensation. He still intended to send her away, but perhaps not today. The wind was sharp, and the work was endless. His daughter, Anna, was a smaller, more fragile version of his own grief. A child of 6 who had not truly spoken since she watched him lower her mother into the hard, unforgiving earth. She moved through the house like a phantom, her large eyes absorbing the world in a profound, heartbreaking silence. When she first saw the strange woman, she had hidden behind Jonah's legs, a tiny hand clutching his trousers. But curiosity was a more powerful force than fear in a child. She began to watch from a distance, her head peeking around door frames as the woman moved through the home, her quiet industry a constant, soothing rhythm. Never pushed, never spoke to the child directly, but simply left small invitations in her wake. One afternoon, while mending one of Anna's worn dresses, she noticed the girl watching her hands. Without a word, took a small scrap of bright blue calico and a blunted needle threaded with thick twine, placing it on a stool near where Anna sat today. For an hour, the child simply looked at it. Then, slowly, her small fingers reached out, mimicking the stitching motion she had observed. The next day, Anna ventured out into the yard, a rare excursion from the shadows of the house. She returned a short time later, her fist clutched tight. She walked directly to Mai, who was kneading dough on the flowered tabletop, and opened her hand. Inside lay a single, slightly crushed prairie wildflower. Anna looked up into Mai's face, her own expression one of intense seriousness, and whispered a word, rusty and faint from disuse. Pretty. It was the first word Jonah had heard his daughter speak in a year. He stood in the doorway to the main room, unseen, and felt a jagged piece of the ice around his heart crack and fall away, the sound of it deafening in the stillness of his soul. The days bled into one another, measured not by the calendar but by the slow, steady return of life to the homestead. Mai asked for nothing, yet she gave everything. She planted a small, hardy garden of herbs and roots near the cabin, her hands coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She showed Anna how to weave intricate patterns from dried grasses, and soon the child's small, clumsy creations began to appear on windowsills and shelves, tiny testaments to a reawakening spirit. Jonah watched it all from his self-imposed distance, a silent observer in his own home. A war raged within him. Part of him, the grieving, broken part, resented this intrusion. The scent of Mai's cooking, the sound of her humming a soft, unfamiliar melody, the sight of Anna's tentative smile, they felt like a betrayal of the memory of his wife. This quiet order was not the life he had known, not the home he had built and lost. But another part of him, a part he thought had died, felt a desperate, clawing gratitude. He had been drowning in his sorrow, pulling his daughter down with him, and this strange, resilient woman had thrown them a lifeline. He found himself listening for the soft shuffle of her footsteps in the morning, noticing the way she shielded her eyes against the setting sun. He remembered his wife, Sarah, teaching Anna to press flowers between the pages of a book. One evening, he saw Mai showing Anna the same thing, her slender fingers guiding the child's. The sight did not bring the sharp stab of pain he expected. Instead, it was a dull, lingering ache, a recognition that life, in its relentless, stubborn way, was determined to grow even in the most desolate of landscapes. The house was no longer a tomb. It was becoming a home again, and the realization terrified him as much as it gave him a sliver of hope. The sky had been a bruised purple for 2 days, the air heavy and still with a sense of impending violence. Then the blizzard came, not as a gentle snowfall but as a furious, roaring beast of wind and ice. It descended upon the plains without warning, erasing the world in a blinding sheet of white. The wind screamed like a banshee, clawing at the log cabin, searching for any crack, any weakness. The world shrank to the 4 walls of their small home, the 3 of them trapped in an enforced intimacy. The storm was a physical manifestation of the turmoil that had been brewing under the surface of their quiet coexistence. Jonah worked methodically, securing the shutters, checking the woodpile, his movements tense and efficient. Inside, the growing cold seeped through the floorboards. The fire in the hearth became their entire universe, a flickering beacon against the raging chaos outside. On the second night of the storm, Anna began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that sent a shard of pure terror through Jonah's heart. He felt her forehead. It was burning. The fever. It was the same fever that had taken Sarah, starting with a small cough and consuming her within a week, leaving him powerless and broken. Panic, cold and sharp, called in his gut. The town, with its doctor and its medicines, was a lifetime away, buried under an impassable mountain of snow. He was trapped, helpless, destined to watch history repeat its cruelest lesson. He looked at his daughter, her small face flushed and her breathing shallow, and the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbled into dust, leaving him utterly and completely exposed to the gale of his own fear. As Jonah's panic threatened to consume him, Mai became a study in absolute calm. Her movements grew even more deliberate, her focus narrowing to the small, feverish child in the cot by the fire. While Jonah paced the floor, a caged animal of fear and memory, she acted. She unpacked a small cloth bundle he had never seen before, from which she produced an array of dried leaves, roots, and tightly bound herbs. The foreign, earthy scents filled the small cabin, cutting through the stale air of sickness. She crushed the leaves and steeped them in hot water, holding the steaming cup to Anna's lips, murmuring to her in a language Jonah did not understand, yet the tone was one of universal comfort. She soaked cloths in cool water and laid them on the child's forehead, her touch infinitely gentle. Jonah stood by, useless, a giant of a man rendered impotent by his own terrifying memories. He knew only brute force and the logic of the land. He knew how to mend a fence, track a deer, and split a log. But against the invisible enemy of a fever, his strength was meaningless. He watched this woman who had arrived with nothing, combat the sickness with a quiet, ancestral knowledge that felt like a form of magic. He saw the utter exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, but her hands never faltered. She was a warrior in her own right, fighting not with a rifle, but with a poultice and a lullaby. The blizzard howled its fury outside, but inside, a different kind of battle was being waged, one woman's gentle, persistent care against the brutal indifference of fate. For the first time, Jonah recognized that the greatest strength was not in the hardness of a man's fists, but in the unwavering tenderness of a woman's hands. The night stretched into an eternity, marked only by the sputtering of the fire and the shallow rhythm of Anna's breathing. Jonah finally sat, his energy spent, on a low stool across the hearth from Mai. The wind's howl was the only sound for a long while, a mournful dirge for the world outside. In the flickering firelight, with their shared fear hanging between them, the last of Jonah's defenses gave way. "The fever," he said, his voice raw, unused to carrying the weight of such emotion. It was the same with her mother. "I brought the doctor. He gave her laudanum." It did nothing. The word spilled out of him, a confession whispered to the flames. "I sat right here. I held her hand. And I watched her slip away. I did nothing." He wasn't looking at but at the ghosts dancing in the fire. He expected silence, or perhaps a polite, uncomprehending nod. Instead, after a long moment, Mai spoke, her own voice soft, her English broken but heavy with a shared understanding of loss. "My family," she began, her gaze distant, looking at a memory a world away. "Flood. War to take my husband. My little boy." She held her hand out, indicating a height just above the floor. "All gone. I am." Nothing. The simple, stark word struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had seen her only as an outcast, a survivor of hardship. He had never considered the shape of her grief, never imagined that she, too, was a ghost haunted by a life that had been washed away. In that moment, in the heart of the storm, they were not a grieving rancher and a foreign woman. They were two solitary survivors, two people hollowed out by loss, finding a strange, profound solace in the shared geography of their pain. The silence that followed was no longer empty, but filled with a new, fragile intimacy. As the first, pale hint of dawn broke through a crack in the shutters, the blizzard's fury began to wane, its roar softening to a weary moan. Inside the cabin, a different kind of quiet had fallen. Anna's breathing was deeper now, more even. Her skin, though still warm, no longer burned with the terrifying heat of the fever. Mai, who had not slept, gently wiped the child's face with a damp cloth. Anna's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in 2 days, they were clear. She looked at Mai and offered a weak but genuine smile. The fever had broken. A wave of relief so powerful it left Jonah lightheaded washed over him. He watched Mai stroke his daughter's hair, her face illuminated by the morning light, and he saw her not as the stranger who had appeared on his porch, not as a transaction or a responsibility, but as the woman who had walked into the heart of his nightmare and led his daughter back out. He saw the deep lines of fatigue around her eyes, the strength in her delicate hands, the profound grace in her silent perseverance. He had been so lost in his own winter, he hadn't realized she was bringing the spring. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't speak. He didn't know the words. Instead, he reached out and gently took her hand. Her skin was cool, her fingers small and delicate in his large, calloused grip. It was a simple gesture, a touch that lasted only a moment, but it was more significant than any vow. It was an acknowledgement. A thank you. A promise. It was the first time he had willingly touched another person since his wife's death, a silent admission that the thaw had finally, truly begun within him. When the snow finally melted enough for travel, they came. Harker and his men, their faces smug and cruel, rode into his yard as if they owned it. Their laughter was the same as it had been the night they had left Mai, but this time it was laced with a different kind of malice. Word had spread. Jonah, the grieving hermit, had kept the foreign woman. He had let her into his house. The joke had taken a turn they hadn't expected, and they had come to reclaim their punchline. "Jonah!" Harker shouted, dismounting. "Heard you found a use for our little gift after all. We've come to take her off your hands." A man in the mining camps offered a good price. Jonah emerged from the cabin, stepping onto the porch. He didn't reach for the rifle propped against the doorframe, but his presence was a wall in itself. He stood, calm and immovable, blocking the entrance. Behind him, in the shadows of the doorway, Mai stood holding Anna's hand. Harker's eyes flickered past Jonah to her, his lips curling into a sneer. "Come on out, girl. Your time here is done." Jonah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were quiet, measured, and as solid as the mountains at his back. "She is not a thing to be claimed," he said, his eyes locked on Harker's. The air crackled with tension. "This is her home." The three simple words hung in the cold air, an absolute and undeniable truth. It was not a plea or a threat. It was a declaration. A public claim that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with sanctuary. Harker searched Jonah's face for a flicker of doubt, a hint of weakness, and found none. He saw a man he no longer recognized. Defeated not by a show of force, but by a quiet, unshakable conviction, Harker spat on the ground, mounted his horse, and led his men away. The spring that followed was more than a change of seasons, it was a resurrection. The harsh, windswept land around the homestead seemed to soften, mirroring the change within its three inhabitants. The small garden Mai had planted flourished, its vibrant green a stark contrast to the barren ground that had once surrounded the cabin. Jonah repaired the fences, his movements no longer frantic and driven, but steady and purposeful. He was not just maintaining a property, he was building a future. The oppressive silence of the house was replaced by a tapestry of new sounds, the quiet melody of Mai's humming as she worked, the gentle murmur of her voice teaching Anna words from her own language, and most miraculous of all, the bright, clear sound of Anna's laughter as she played in the sunshine. One afternoon, Jonah stopped his work, leaning on his axe handle, and watched them. Mai was showing Anna a simple game with stones, their heads bent close together, their hair, one black as a raven's wing, the other the color of sun-bleached wheat, touching in the breeze. As he watched, a slow, unpracticed smile spread across his face. It felt foreign, but it was real. He had received her as a cruel joke, a symbol of his isolation. But this resilient woman, who had been discarded by the world, had quietly rebuilt his. She had not filled the hole left by his wife, but had shown him that the heart was a vast and stubborn thing, capable of growing new life around the edges of its deepest wounds. They had become a family, not of blood, but of shared silence, mutual healing, and a love that was forged in the heart of a storm and needed no words to announce its arrival. They were an earned peace, a quiet testament to the truth that even after the cruelest winter, warmth could find its way home. We hope this story of redemption and love found in the most unexpected of places has touched your heart. It reminds us that family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the people who show up when you're trapped in the storm and quietly, bravely, lead you back into the light. If you were moved by their journey, please consider subscribing to our channel for more emotional and inspirational stories. Click that bell icon so you never miss a tale of hope and the resilience of the human spirit.